Before the Imperium, before the Emperor, before even the memory of Terra had cooled from its birth, there was war. Not a war of flags or ideologies. Not even a war for territory, but a war between gods and the architects of life itself. And in that ancient inferno, did not create them gently. They shaped them as weapons. The enemy was the Necrons, once mortal beings who traded their souls for living metal bodies, and their masters, the C'tan, star-devouring entities who fed on suns and suffering alike. The war in heaven was not a campaign. It was a cosmic extinction event stretching across millions of years. The Old Ones needed soldiers who could fight something that existed beyond steel and plasma. So they crafted a species whose minds burned brighter than stars. The Aeldari were not merely intelligent. They were psychic. From birth, every Aeldari possessed a natural attunement to the warp, the parallel dimension of psychic energy that underpins reality itself. Where humans struggle to produce a flicker of psychic ability, the Aeldari were born immersed in it. Their thoughts did not simply occur. They resonated. This was not an accident. The Old Ones understood that the C'tan could not be defeated through brute force alone. The warp, that turbulent sea of emotion and thought, was the only realm the star gods could not fully dominate. So the Aeldari were designed to command it. Not cautiously, not partially, completely. They were engineered to shape the immaterial like clay, to weaponize emotion, to manifest psychic constructs as easily as breathing, to operate within the Webway, a labyrinthine dimension-spanning network built by the Old Ones to travel faster than light without touching the warp directly. The Webway was sanctuary and highway both, and the Aeldari mastered it as if it were instinct. From the beginning, they were different from every species that would follow. Humanity would later stumble into psychic power through mutation and chance. The Aeldari were purpose-built. They were never meant to be ordinary, but weapons forged in desperation inherit the desperation of their creators. The war in heaven did not end cleanly. It ended in fragmentation. The C'tan shattered. The Necrons retreated into stasis tombs to sleep away the ages. The Old Ones vanished, destroyed or scattered beyond recovery. And the Aeldari remained, alone. Imagine that for a moment. You are created to fight gods, and then the gods disappear. What does a weapon become when there is nothing left to destroy? For millions of years after the war in heaven, the Aeldari inherited the galaxy. No rival empire rose to challenge them. The Orcs, a devolved remnant of another Old One creation called the Krork, were savage but contained. The Necrons slept beneath dead worlds. There was no external equal, and that absence of threat would shape everything. The Aeldari physiology reinforced their superiority. Their lifespan stretched across millennia. Their reflexes eclipsed human comprehension. Their technology merged psychic resonance with matter. Wraithbone constructs grown through thought, starships guided by living minds, weapons that sang with psychic harmonics. They did not build machines. They persuaded reality. Even at this earliest stage, the signs were present. The Aeldari did not view the warp as dangerous. They viewed it as inheritance. Where humans fear possession, the Aeldari walked through its tides with confidence bordering on reverence. They were designed to dominate it without corruption. Their psychic presence was structured, disciplined, harmonic. The warp answered them like a loyal hound. For a time. But here lies the first fracture. The warp is not neutral. It reflects emotion. It amplifies sensation. It grows from thought. And the Aeldari were not an emotionally muted species. Quite the opposite. Their minds burned hot. Their sensations ran deep. Their capacity for joy, grief, obsession, desire, all magnified beyond human scale. In war, that intensity was focused outward. Against the Necrons, against the C'tan, against extinction itself. In peace, it had nowhere to go. The Old Ones had engineered power. They had not engineered restraint. And restraint is learned only through consequence. The Aeldari emerged from the war in heaven not merely victorious, but unchallenged. They had seen gods fall. They had outlived their creators. They had inherited a galaxy stripped of equals. There was no external pressure to moderate them, no rival to humble them, no existential threat to sharpen discipline. The warp remained calm because their purpose remained intact. But purpose, once fulfilled, leaves a vacuum. And vacuums invite indulgence. It would take millions of years for that indulgence to curdle into catastrophe. The fall was not a sudden madness. It was a slow shift in focus. From survival to experience. From discipline to sensation. From guardians of psychic balance to its greatest destabilizers. The war in heaven proved they were never a normal civilization. They were an engineered apex, a species whose baseline eclipsed entire galactic empires that would come later. But being designed to fight gods does not make one immune to becoming a problem greater than the gods themselves. When humanity rises in the 41st millennium, it fears the warp. It fears chaos. It fears damnation. The Aeldari once walked that same sea without fear. They believed they were immune. They believed their design was permanent. They believed mastery meant control. History punishes that kind of certainty. And long before Slaanesh ever opened its eyes, before the eye of terror split the stars, before billions screamed in a single psychic instant, the flaw was already there, not in their strength, in their confidence. The old ones had created perfection for a specific purpose, but perfection without opposition decays. The Necrons would one day awaken, humanity would rise and fracture the galaxy, and new chaos would rage openly. But in that ancient silence after the war in heaven, the Aeldari stood alone at the peak of existence, and peaks of only one direction left. Down. The galaxy was quiet, and in that quiet, the first echoes began. When the war ended, the Aeldari did not rebuild. They expanded. Across 1,000,000 worlds, their dominion stretched in luminous arcs of wraithbone and psychic light. They did not conquer through grinding campaigns or massed armies. Most worlds simply bent to their presence, or were reshaped to suit them. The Webway, the old one's labyrinthine dimension-spanning corridor beyond real space, became the arteries of their empire. They traveled without touching the warp's raw tides. They moved between stars without risk. Entire fleets slipped through hidden gates unseen. No rival civilization in the 41st millennium commands such freedom. Not even the Imperium. For millions of years, the Aeldari Empire was the uncontested galactic superpower. The Necrons slept. The Orcs fought among themselves. Humanity had not yet crawled from terror's dust. There was nothing left to resist them. And that was the beginning of the change. Their technology surpassed anything now known in the age of the Imperium. Wraithbone, psychoreactive matter shaped by focused thought, allowed cities to grow like living organisms. Spires sang in harmonic resonance. Starships pulsed with psychic life. Weapons did not merely fire. They whispered destruction into existence. They did not mine worlds. They persuaded them to bloom. Scarcity vanished from their civilization. Energy was limitless. Material need dissolved. Disease was trivial. Death was distant, often voluntary, chosen after millennia of experience. Imagine a society where survival is guaranteed. What remains to motivate it? The Aeldari turned inward. Their culture flourished beyond imagination. Art ceased to be decoration and became sensation. Performance ceased to be entertainment and became experience. Every emotion was explored with obsessive refinement. Their minds were not human. They felt more deeply. Joy struck like lightning. Grief cut like a blade. Curiosity consumed entire centuries. And with no enemy to fight, those internal fires had only one direction to burn: outward into excess. This was not immediate decadence. It was gradual. At first, it was simply exploration. Philosophical schools multiplied. Psychic disciplines refined. Entire worlds dedicated themselves to singular pursuits: art, pleasure, sensation, intellectual transcendence. They called it progress. They believed they were evolving beyond war. But the warp listens. The warp, a dimension shaped by thought and emotion, does not distinguish between noble passion and indulgent obsession. It grows from intensity, and the Aeldari were the most psychically intense species ever created. Every triumph echoed. Every indulgence reverberated. Every desire rippled outward. At the height of their empire, the Aeldari did not merely inhabit the galaxy. They shaped its emotional climate. Where humanity's psychic footprint flickers, the Aeldari blazed. Yet for millennia, nothing seemed wrong. There were no demonic incursions, no warp storms of catastrophic scale, no chaos gods born from their excess. Not yet. In this era, the four great ruinous powers as the Imperium knows them were not fully ascendant. Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle existed in primal forms, vast warp intelligences fed by violence, change, and decay across countless species. But none were shaped by a single civilization. The Aeldari were unique. Their empire's core worlds glittered like constellations brought down to planetary scale. Cities arched across continents in seamless psychic geometry. Entire star systems were terraformed to aesthetic preference. They had transcended the need for external validation. And when a civilization transcends necessity, it begins chasing sensation. The first signs of fragmentation appeared quietly. But discomfort. They saw obsession replacing discipline. They felt the emotional pitch rising too high, too constant. These were the ancestors of the craft world Aeldari, those who would later flee aboard colossal world ships. But during the Golden Age, they were considered eccentric, conservative, unambitious. Why retreat when existence is limitless? The majority remained within the heart of the Empire, because nothing bad had happened. And that is the most dangerous moment in any civilization. When there is no memory of loss, when success feels permanent, when superiority feels earned rather than circumstantial. The Aeldari had defeated the C'tan. They had survived the war in heaven. They had outlived their creators. They believed themselves immune to collapse. Even their relationship with death changed. Reincarnation through the warp was common. The souls of the dead flowed back into the immaterium, only to return in new bodies. Death was not annihilation. It was transition. They treated the warp as a cradle. But cradles can become jaws. As emotional exploration intensified, subtle warp disturbances began to form. Not storms. Not yet. Ripples. Unusual dreams. Psychic dissonance in far-flung sectors. A faint background pressure that sensitive seers could detect. Most dismissed it. After all, they were masters of the warp. Had they not been designed for this? Their confidence was not arrogance in the beginning. It was historical evidence. For millions of years, they had navigated the immaterial without corruption. Their psychic architecture was stable. Their minds were disciplined. They had earned their pride. But pride without challenge becomes assumption. And assumption blinds. The golden age of the Aeldari was not simply a time of prosperity. It was the moment the galaxy tipped into imbalance without realizing it. Because emotion at their scale does not fade. It accumulates. Every ecstatic ritual, every sensory experiment, every obsession pursued without restraint. The warp grew denser around their empire. Humanity in the 41st millennium trembles at demonic manifestation. The Aeldari of this era would have laughed at such fey. They believed the warp reflected them. They did not consider that it might be reshaping itself around their excess. There's a difference. An empire without rivals does not prepare for consequence. It prepares for refinement. And refinement, when divorced from purpose, becomes indulgence. At the height of their golden age, the Aeldari were not yet damned. They were admired by themselves. They saw their empire as proof that suffering was obsolete. That war was primitive. That evolution meant transcendence of limitation. But they misunderstood one truth. Limitation is not always weakness. Sometimes, it is the boundary that keeps power from devouring itself. The Webway gates glowed across the stars. The core worlds shimmered in psychic splendor. The Aeldari believed they had achieved permanence. They had built paradise, and paradise has no warning system. The galaxy did not tremble. It listened, and deep within the warp, something began to stir, not born of hatred, or decay, or ambition, but of sensation, and it was still growing. No empire collapses at its height. It rots. At first, the Aeldari did not notice the shift. Their dominions still spanned the stars. The Webway still carried them effortlessly between worlds. Their technology still answered thought as easily as breath. Nothing external threatened them. And so the danger came from within. In the long peace after the war in heaven, the ancient conflict where they were forged to fight the Necrons and their star gods, purpose began to fade. War had given their intensity direction. Victory removed it. They did not turn savage. They turned inward. Emotion had always defined the Aeldari. Their psychic sensitivity was not an ability, it was their baseline state. They felt everything more sharply than younger species ever could. Joy was overwhelming. Grief was abyssal. Curiosity consumed centuries. When survival is guaranteed, emotion seeks expansion. Art became more immersive. Not paintings, but lived experiences. Performances that blurred identity. Sensory exploration that pushed beyond comfort, beyond moderation, beyond restraint. At first, it was refinement. Then it was escalation. Pleasure cults began as philosophical circles dedicated to exploring the full spectrum of sensation. Pain and ecstasy were studied as two halves of the same truth. Identity became fluid, mutable, theatrical. They did not call it decadence. They called it transcendence. The warp listened. The warp, the psychic dimension shaped by thought and emotion, does not judge. It reflects. And the Aeldari were the most powerful psychic species in existence. Their collective emotional output did not fade harmlessly into the void. It accumulated. Every obsession left an imprint. Every ritualized excess echoed outward. Across millions of worlds, the emotional pitch of their civilization rose steadily, like a note held too long. There were those who sensed the change. Seers began reporting disturbances in the immaterium, not storms, not diamonds, but pressure, a density forming at the center of their psychic presence. Dreams became more vivid, sensations more addictive. The need for intensity grew harder to satisfy. The Craftworld factions, those who would later flee aboard massive world ships, withdrew quietly during this era. They did not predict a god's birth. They simply recognized imbalance. Emotion without discipline becomes hunger. They were mocked for their caution. After all, the Aeldari had walked the warp uncorrupted for millions of years. They had defeated the C'tan. They had survived the extinction of their creators, the Old Ones. Their dominance seemed proven. Arrogance did not arrive as cruelty. It arrived as certainty. They believed they were immune to consequence. But consequence had not vanished. It had only been delayed. The Empire fractured culturally. Entire star systems dedicated themselves to ever more extreme exploration of sensation. Isolation grew. Empathy shrank. The pursuit of experience overshadowed collective stability. What once shocked became ordinary. What once satisfied became insufficient. This was the true decay, not moral weakness. Escalation. Because the Aeldari psyche was not built for moderation. When they pursued something, they pursued it completely. A human might indulge for days. An Aeldari could devote centuries to a single obsession. And in the warp, centuries matter. The reincarnation cycle began to falter. Souls lingered longer in the immaterium. Some did not return. Psychic constructs required greater focus to stabilize. Subtle tremors rippled through the Webway. Still, the core worlds dismissed along. No enemy fleets massed at their borders. No rival empire challenged them. There was no external pressure to force introspection. Paradise rarely questions itself. The pleasure cults deepened into something ritualized and relentless. Sensation was no longer explored for understanding. It was consumed for amplification. And with every amplified emotion, the warp thickened around them. There is a moment in every decline when reversal is still possible. The Aeldari passed that moment without noticing. Because nothing visible had broken. The stars still burned, the Webway still opened, their cities still shone. But beneath that brilliance, a singular current was forming, a convergence of desires so focused it began to take shape. Not as a whisper, as anticipation. The warp had always mirrored the Aeldari. Now it was beginning to condense them. The Empire had eliminated war, scarcity, and death as permanent threats. It had not eliminated appetite. An appetite, without limit, becomes gravity. Across the galaxy's psychic depths, something was coalescing from the accumulated excess of a civilization that believed itself untouchable. They had engineered their own vulnerability, not through weakness, through abundance. The slow decay was not chaos. It was harmony pushed too far, a note held beyond endurance. And in the warp, the echo was almost ready to answer. It happened in a single breath, across the jeweled core of the Aeldari Empire, in cities grown from living wraithbone and halls where sensation was ritual. There was a moment of unbearable stillness. Then the warp tore open, not gradually, not in warning.I end birth. For millennia, the emotional excess of the Aeldari had gathered within the immaterium, the psychic realm shaped by thought and feeling. Desire refined into obsession. Pleasure elevated into identity. Experience pursued without restraint. That accumulation reached critical mass, and it awakened. Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess, sensation, and obsession, was born in an instant of catastrophic self-awareness. Not summoned, not worshipped into form, created. The psychic shockwave was immeasurable. Every Aeldari mind within the Empire felt it simultaneously, not as sound, not as light, but as annihilation. Billions died where they stood. Their bodies fell lifeless as their souls were ripped screaming into the warp, consumed by the very god they had shaped. Entire worlds were emptied in seconds. Star systems destabilized as psychic infrastructure collapsed. The Webway trembled under the violence of metaphysical rupture. The enemy was consequence. At the heart of their civilization, reality itself split. A permanent wound formed in space. The Eye of Terror, a vast region where real space and the warp overlap in perpetual storm. The Eye of Terror, a colossal warp rift still raging in the 41st millennium, marks the grave of their empire. Everything at the center was erased, not conquered, erased. The gods of the Aeldari fared no better. Kala Men Sharkaine, their war god, was shattered in the psychic detonation, broken into fragments that would later manifest as avatars within surviving craft worlds. Isha was taken, others were devoured or scattered. Their pantheon was not eternal. It was vulnerable, and Slaanesh fed. Unlike the older chaos powers, Khorne, Tzeentch, and Nurgle, who formed gradually from galactic emotion, Slaanesh had a singular origin. Its hunger was calibrated to Aeldari souls. They were not simply prey. They were signature. On the distant craft worlds, massive world ships that had begun leaving the Empire during the slow decay, the shockwave struck like a blade across the spirit. Millions died even there, but distance spared them total extinction. They watched their civilization vanish in a single psychic scream. Within the hidden depths of the Webway, the city of Comoras survived the initial blast. Those who would become the Drukari endured not because they were innocent, but because they were insulated. Survival did not mean safety. It meant inheritance of the curse. Because after the fall, death changed. Before, an Aeldari soul would pass into the warp and eventually return through reincarnation. After Slaanesh's birth, every unprotected soul was drawn irresistibly into its grasp. Not judged, not bargained for, consumed. Eternally, the warp itself shifted in the aftermath. Storms intensified across vast regions of space. Psychic travel became more perilous. Even humanity, then fractured during the Age of Strife, suffered from the turbulence unleashed by the Aeldari catastrophe, therefore destabilized the galaxy. And yet, for the survivors, the scale of galactic consequence mattered less than the personal horror. They had created their own predator. The empire that once spanned millions of worlds was reduced to scattered remnants, drifting craft worlds, hidden Webway enclaves, isolated exodyte planets. From immortality without fear to existence defined by it. The fall did not unfold as a war. It concluded as a revelation. Power without restraint reshapes reality. Emotion at sufficient scale becomes architecture, and architecture can wake up. The scream ended. The wound remained. And within the Eye of Terror, something new breathed for the first time. Hungry. There were chaos gods before Slaanesh. Khorne rose from endless war across countless species. Nurgle swelled from decay, disease, and the fear of death. Tzeentch churned from ambition, change, and scheming intellect. They were ancient, diffuse, fed by the galaxy itself. Slaanesh was different. Slaanesh had a singular cradle, the Aeldari. No other civilization has birthed a chaos power so directly. Not through worship, not through ritual summoning, through saturation. For millions of years, the Aeldari psyche flooded the warp with sustained, amplified emotion. Their empire's heart pulsed with obsession, pleasure refined into identity, sensation pursued beyond boundary, self-expression sharpened into addiction. The warp does not waste intensity. It condenses it. As their excess escalated during the slow decay, a dominant current formed within the immaterium. Not rage, not despair, but desire sharpened to hunger. Every ecstatic ritual, every obsessive pursuit, every indulgence without consequence added density to that current. Eventually, density becomes gravity, and gravity becomes consciousness. When Slaanesh awakened, it did so fully formed, a chaos god of excess, perfection, obsession, and experience pushed beyond meaning. Its birth permanently altered the structure of the warp. Before the fall, the immaterial tides were violent but diffuse. Afterward, a new pole of attraction existed, a focused hunger anchored to a single species' emotional spectrum. The Aeldari did not merely empower chaos, they reconfigured it. Slaanesh's appetite is not random, it is intimate. Aeldari souls shine brightly in the warp, resonant and refined. To the Prince of Excess, they are uniquely vivid. This is why their doom is specific. When a human dies, their soul dissipates unless claimed. When an Aeldari dies unprotected, their soul is drawn immediately towards Slaanesh. Not because of worship, because of origin. The god was shaped around them. Their emotional architecture became its foundation. In a sense, every Aeldari carries the psychic imprint of Slaanesh's creation. They are bound to what they made. This is the true horror. Therefore was not punishment from an external force. It was consequence crystallized into divinity. Even now, 10,000 years into the 41st millennium, Slaanesh hunts them with singular focus. Other species feed chaos in cycles: war, plague, ambition, despair. But the Aeldari are legacy, unfinished consumption. This is why survival among the remnants revolves around denial. The craft world Aeldari developed spirit stones, psychoreactive gems capable of trapping a soul at the moment of death. These are embedded within infinity circuits, vast psychic matrices housing ancestral spirits. The infinity circuit is more than technology. It is defiance. The Drukari, lacking sufficient spirit stones, discovered another solution. By inflicting extreme suffering upon others, they replenish their own souls, slowing Slaanesh's drain. Agony becomes sustenance. It is survival through cruelty. The Exodites bind their dead into world spirits anchored to their planets, insulating their souls from immediate predation. Every faction is a response to the same truth. Their god cannot be undone easily, because Slaanesh is not an invading entity. It is structural reality. The Eye of Terror still burns as proof. The massive warp rift formed at the moment of birth. Warp travel grew more dangerous after the fall. Demonic incursions increased. Even humanity's long age of strife was worsened by the turbulence unleashed. The Aeldari did not just doom themselves. They destabilized the galaxy. And yet, Slaanesh is not simply excess or pleasure. It is obsession in all forms. Perfection pursued until it erases identity. Beauty sharpened into addiction. Even discipline, when pushed beyond moderation, falls within its grasp. The Prince of Excess is the logical endpoint of a civilization that removed restraint from power. They once believed they were masters of the warp. Now the warp holds a god shaped in their image, and that god remembers who made it. They survived, but survival is not restoration. The craft world Aeldari drift through the galaxy aboard continent-sized vessels of living wraithbone, self-contained worlds sustained by discipline. After the fall, they forged the path system, a rigid structure of life roles designed to prevent obsession. One path at a time, total immersion, then withdrawal. The path of the warrior births aspect shrines, dire avengers, howling banshees, striking scorpions, each embodying a fragment of Kaine, the shattered war god. Those who cannot leave the warrior's focus become exarchs, eternally bound to conflict. Even control has edges. Every craftworlder wears a spirit stone. Upon death, it captures the soul before Slaanesh can claim it. Those stones are placed within the Infinity Circuit, a psychic network housing the consciousness of the dead. Their ancestors do not fade. They endure as counsel, when war demands it. Those spirits are awakened inside Wraith constructs, towering Wraith Guard and Wraith Lords animated by the fallen. The dead fight because the living cannot afford further loss. Elsewhere, hidden within the Webway's labyrinth, the Drukery of Komarau endure through darker means. Slaanesh drains them constantly, so they replenish themselves through inflicted suffering. Pain sustains them. Their raids into real space harvest captives not for empire, but for continuation. Without torment, they wither. The Exodites survive on distant maiden worlds. Living austere lives bound to planetary world spirits that shelter their dead from immediate predation. Each faction represents a different answer to extinction. Discipline, cruelty, simplicity. Yet none reverse decline. The galaxy of the 41st millennium is unforgiving. The Imperium expands through endless war. The Necrons awaken from tombs older than human history. Tyranids descend like locust swarms from beyond the void. The Aeldari are no longer rulers. They are remnants navigating probability. Their farsees peer into the warp's branching futures, altering events with surgical precision to preserve their dwindling numbers. They manipulate wars, sacrifice allies, and strike from shadow. Not for conquest, for delay. Each century narrows their margin. Each battle costs irreplaceable lives. They endure, intelligent, precise, haunted. But endurance is not recovery. It is postponement. They are not yet extinct. That is their burden. Slaanesh endures as a permanent presence in the warp, the god born from their excess, eternally attuned to their souls. To other species, chaos is temptation or corruption. To the Aeldari, it is gravity. Every unprotected death ends in consumption. Every shattered spirit stone is an eternity lost. Their decline is not sudden. It is incremental, mathematical. Their farseers, psychic seers who read probability within the warp, search endlessly for survivable futures. They see branching timelines like threads of fragile light. Most end in extinction. Some end later, so they intervene. They are not heroes in the modern galaxy. They are preservationists of their own species. Some cling to prophecy. Whispers speak of Ennead, the god of the dead, forming slowly from the souls held within infinity circuits. If fully awakened, Ennead might challenge Slaanesh directly. But there is a cost implied in every telling. A god of death may require death in abundance. Salvation may demand sacrifice on a scale they can scarcely afford. The irony is sharp. Once, they birthed a god through excess. Now they contemplate birthing one through extinction. Around them, the galaxy burns without pause. The Imperium wages crusades in the Emperor's name. The Necrons reclaim ancient dominions. Tyranids consume entire systems. Chaos spreads through rifts like the Eye of Terror, the wound left by their fall. The Aeldari move between these forces like ghosts of a forgotten age. They remember ruling the stars. They remember immortality without fear. They remember the moment the warp screamed. Memory defines them more than ambition ever could. But memory does not halt decline. They fight with elegance. They plan with precision. They endure with discipline. And still, their numbers fall. The future is not dramatic for them. It is narrowing. Each passing century reduces possibility. Each lost soul strengthens the predator that waits. They once stood above gods. Now they survive beneath one. The stars they ruled burn on, indifferent. The hunger remains, and the silence grows closer. If you made it this far, you already understand why the Aeldari are one of the most tragic civilizations in Warhammer 40,000. If you enjoy deep, immersive explorations like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next Chronicle in Shorts. If you want to go deeper, channel memberships are turned on to directly support the time and research that goes into creating these long-form narratives. And if there's another faction, Primarch, event, or ancient mystery you want uncovered, let me know in the comments. The galaxy is vast, and there are still many truths left to reveal.